All right, our guest tonight, I'm so honored to have on. We've been emailing back and forth. Annie Kagan is our guest tonight. Annie began writing songs at the age of 14. At 15, she was signed by a producer from Columbia Records. At 16, she was performing in New York City cafes and clubs. After 10 years as a songwriter and performer, Annie returned to college, graduating with honors, and became a doctor of chiropractic with a successful private practice on Manhattan's Upper East Side. Attracted to Eastern spiritual traditions, Annie studied yoga and pursued an intense meditation practice. Following her inner voice, she left her career as a doctor and abandoned her hectic city life in search of serenity in a small town by the bay on the tip of Long Island. She returned to songwriting, collaborating with Grammy and Emmy award-winning producer Brian Keane. When her brother Billy died unexpectedly and began speaking to her from the afterlife, her future took a surprising turn. She has masterfully combined her talents as a lyricist, performer, and healer in order to touch the lives of others with Billy's communications from the other side. In her book debut, The Afterlife of Billy Fingers. Annie's website is www.anniekagan.com. So without any further delay, let's get Annie on the line. Annie, good morning. Welcome to K-Talk and the Fringe Radio Show.
Well, good morning, and I'm very happy to be here with you.
Well, thank you for being here.
Yes, we're honored to have you here. Yeah, this is the best time of the night to talk about this stuff.
It's also good. Time
it is actually.
It's nice to talk about it.
It is. It is. Annie, I read your bio, and I just scratched the surface of it. But I'd like to, our audience and myself, we'd like to hear a little bit of the backstory. You started performing at a very young age, and it sounds like you've had and still have a very rich life, full of interesting things.
Yes, and actually, this story began when I was a chiropractor. First I was a songwriter and a singer, and the music business is a very tough business, especially for a kid. And I went back to school, I became a chiropractor, and then after practicing for several years, I started to become really stressed out from working with people who were in pain all the time, even though they were getting better. I was surprised at how kind of down I was feeling, and so I decided to learn to meditate because I figured that would make me stronger and more centered. But strangely, the meditation technique that I did actually made me extremely sensitive, and it became even more difficult to go to work, and it became really hard for me to live in New York City as well, with the noise and the pace and the overstimulation. So I made a very difficult decision and a very scary decision, which was I gave up my practice, not knowing what I was going to do next, and I sold it, and I moved to a small house by the bay, and I thought, well, maybe I'll go back to songwriting. I don't know what I'll do. It was pretty scary, and I had no idea that my life was setting the stage for me to have really a fascinating adventure.
Yes, yeah, exactly. It is. I think that sometimes we get caught up in all the hecticness of it and forget about life. Kind of passes us by sometimes. Amy.
Yeah. Well, I have heard that doing meditation does make it a little easier sometimes. Some people it makes it easier for them to pick up on things after meditation. So.
Yes, I was meditating to my own surprise and shock. I was meditating 3 hours a day.
Really?
So it wasn't just like a little 20-minute meditation.
Because sometimes some people can't even meditate, so that's good. That's really good.
Yeah, it was very surprising to me, though. I mean, I was never somebody who envisioned myself doing something like that. And I think the degree of it, but I also really think that there was a plan somewhere there, that I was meant to leave the city, meant to leave my practice, and meant to write this book.
So how did your brother, obviously he was and is still a big part of your life. How did all this come to be, and then you writing the book?
Yeah, well, soon after I moved, seeking solitude, my brother, who the title of the book is, how my bad boy brother proved to me there's life after death, because Billy was always my older brother, and he was always my bad boy brother. He always had problems with drugs, alcohol, but also he was a very lovable, charming, marvelous person who lived by his own rules and kind of enjoyed life a lot. And so he had been missing for some time, and he showed up. Not that long after I had moved, and we kind of had to rescue him from South America, and then try as I did, and he did. He was really at a point where his addictions overwhelmed him. And finally, one night, he was hit by a car.
Oh, wow.
And I was so completely grief-stricken and really devastated and feeling like, God, I could have somehow done better. And about 3 weeks after his death, it was sunrise, and I very, very, very clearly heard his voice calling me as if there was a hole in my ceiling. And he was saying, Annie, get up, it's me, it's Billy. And of course, I thought I was dreaming.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure if I said to myself or out loud, Billy, you're dead, you can't be here. And he said, no, it's really me. Get a notebook. And when I got up to get a notebook, all of a sudden I realized, you know what, I'm not dreaming. I'm in my room, I'm walking. And he started describing the beautiful, incredible new journey that he was on, floating through a beautiful divine universe and being tended to by higher beings. And then while he spoke to me, the atmosphere of his world, which was soothing and healing, really came through. And instead of feeling just miserable and awful, I began to feel quite euphoric and happy. And that was just the first of many visits where he took me along on his 2.5 journey into the realms beyond this world.
Wow. Yeah. One of our listeners, we got quite a few questions sent in for you, Annie, and a question to answer the listener's question, and my question too is, how quickly did your brother contact you after he had passed? Was it right away?
No, it was 3 weeks.
3 weeks, okay.
He died on the 20th of January, and it was February 11th. So it was definitely a 3-week period.
Yeah. Were you skeptical when this happened at first? I mean, did you kind of think it was, I use this term quite often, wishful thinking maybe?
Absolutely. Yeah. I thought that somehow my grief had made me go a little crazy, and that my mind was making this up to make me feel better, right? Wishful thinking, as you say.
Right.
And then because Billy knew what I was feeling and thinking, I think it was on the second visit after he spoke for a while, he said, I know you have doubts about all this, and why shouldn't you? So along with talking with you, I'm going to give you proof that you're not just imagining this. And actually, he gave me a series of what's called evidentiary after-death communications, which means that he tells me things I couldn't possibly know that turn out to be true every time. And really, if he hadn't given me those proofs, and there are many in the book, I would not have published the book. I would have just thought it was my own private little fantasy, maybe, who knows. Mm-hmm. But, you know, the interesting thing is, even like maybe 2/3 through the journey, while he was talking to me, you know, I believed it. But then when he would go away, even though he gave me proof, I was skeptical. And it was really almost impossible for me to accept the fact that somebody was really speaking to me from another realm. And I think the reason is because, you know, our minds are not really prepared to accept this. Mm-hmm. There's something else within us. I call it our intuition. But every time I went into my head or my mind space, I was very, very skeptical and doubtful.
Yeah. Well, because it would make you, you know, it's kind of like when some, you know, people, I've experienced it with an animal, with a dog I had years ago. I mean, sometimes when somebody who you're so close to or get very close to passes away, you sometimes feel that you're hearing them, and it is confusing because sometimes it seems so real, but obviously in this case let me ask you, Annie, with your contact with him, were you able to interact with him?
Oh yeah, and and actually, you know, we would argue a lot, and we would argue because one of the ways that he gave me evidence was he would tell me to say things to people I knew, and that would mean I would have to tell them, hey, my dead brother, you know, said this about you. Is it true? And, you know, I was extremely secretive about what was happening with me. I only told maybe 5 or 6 people. So, yeah, I would say, no, Billy, I'm not going to do that. Or especially once he wanted me to give a message to somebody who was in this very small little class, and this person no way ever believed that, you know, my dead brother would be talking to me. So he often would ask me to do things that I really didn't want to do, including, you know, really writing a book was definitely something that I did not want to do. I mean, writing a book is one thing. That would have been fun. But writing a book with my dead brother had no space in my life. This was not the way that I saw myself. So, you know, the whole thing was kind of riddled with conflict.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Did he? So 3 weeks. He passes away. 3 weeks later, this starts to happen. And how many years ago was this, Annie?
Well, now this was a long time ago. This was back in 2005.
Is he still in contact with you?
He is still in contact with me. Yes, he is.
Are you able to? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are you able to? How do I put this? Are you able to drum up a conversation with him pretty much at any time?
Not really, and I would say that he has always been in charge, which I make a joke in the book, like, because in our life I was always in charge, right? Because I was the good, responsible one, and he was the one who always had to be led. So now we've reversed roles. And, you know, I don't ask him a lot of questions. I don't ask him about my life. He really has a job much bigger than me, because I would say that the amount of emails and messages that I get every day about how he's affecting other people's lives is probably the most satisfying part of this journey. He's not really here just personally for me.
He's here for others.
He's here for others, yeah. It's like this was his job. This was one of the reasons. I mean, you said before, I have a rich life and I've done many things, but Billy did so many things in his life, and he went through a lot of hardship. And I think because of that, what he talks about brings a lot of comfort to a lot of people who are going through difficult things. And, sometimes people will ask me, well, why did this happen to me, right? Like, why me? Why can't they have these long conversations with the other side? And I say, because, he's not doing it just for me. He's doing it for others. He's doing it to get this information into the world, which, comforts people on so many levels. It comforts people who've lost loved ones. It comforts people who have addiction problems, or who have people in their life who have addiction problems. So, it's really not so much of a personal thing.
Yeah, interesting.
It is.
We got a bunch of questions for you, Annie. Can we go ahead and post them up to you?
Oh, yeah. Great.
Carol writes in and says, does Annie see Billy or just hear his voice?
Yeah, that's a great question. At first, let me say that the communication has changed as he's changed. So he's taking us on a journey like deep into the realms of the afterlife. So at first, I would hear him really, really clearly in his natural voice. Then he went through a deeper phase where I would see kind of like a ball, like an orb of light in my room, and I would like focus on it, and then I could hear him. There were moments then where he actually got a new body. He got a light body. And then I would get glimpses of him, and I could see him for different periods. Now I mostly hear him. So it really changes. But yes, there were times when I could see him. And of course, the first time he appeared to me, since he's Billy, and I have to say that even though it's a book about death, he's very funny. Really has an amazing sense of humor. And so the first time I saw him, I saw him in the sky, and he was like dressed like an angel with a little crooked halo on his head, with this, making faces like he's holy. I mean, he was like cracking me up, kind of to say, you know what, honey, it's not that serious. It's okay. So I think that that's his message to me all the time, is kind of lighten up a little bit.
So he's kind of, I guess the term I'm looking for is he's kind of evolved in some ways.
Totally. And that's, I think, one of the greatest things that I've learned about the afterlife, because I think before, if I thought about it, which I didn't a lot, I thought, we go into like some kind of a sea of bliss, and, we're just blissed out. But actually what I've learned from Billy is that on the other side, we're on a wonderful evolutionary journey, and things change and move even more than they do here on Earth. So yes, he's evolving all the time, as are we. So you go through the door of death, and you do still keep changing, but it's a lot easier over there than it is here.
Yeah.
Another listener writes in, got a couple questions for you. First of all, Bill in upstate New York writes in and says, Annie, have you ever considered going to a spiritual medium or other professional to discuss your what he would call paranormal experience? And was Billy at peace without all of the past addictive problems he had in his living life?
Great question. In order to keep my communications with Billy pure, I don't even read material about the afterlife. Like sometimes I get books to review, and once in a while I have to, and I recently got a book from a friend, and I'm like, you know what, I really can't read this because I don't want anybody else's input. So I don't go to psychics, I don't go to mediums, but many, many, many of them contact me now. about how much Billy's teachings have meant to them, because there's a lot of teaching about life in the book. As a matter of fact, somebody wrote to me and said, God, I never would have guessed that a book about death would teach me so much about life. And I think that's what Billy is here to do. And as far as the addiction question, that's very important, because we tend to judge others and we tend to judge ourselves for whatever our difficulties are. Mm-hmm. And when Billy did his life review, he said, my addictions were one of the most interesting parts of my life, and I came to Earth really to explore that path. Now, that's something we would never, ever think. We would just say it's bad to have that problem, and there's a lot of shame around the issue. And so he makes it okay for you to have whatever difficulties you have. That doesn't mean he wants you to stay on the losing side, but it's okay. It's okay that he had an addiction problem, and he learned an enormous amount from it.
Yes.
So really, you can't really look at other people or yourself. That's another thing I learned. And, make a value judgment or a God judgment.
Yeah. That's so true.
It is.
Yeah.
Now this is maybe a little bit of a weird question, Annie, but do you think that, a lot of people that have had addiction problems, whether it's drugs or whether it's alcohol, whatever it is, some of those people tend to be very, even if it's not an addiction, but let's say they've used them over a period of time in their life, they tend to block out all of the day-to-day noise. And I don't know how Billy was when he was alive as a human here on Earth, but a lot of people that are in a different state of mind, if you will. The day-to-day hustle and bustle doesn't affect them. They're not really concerned about getting up and getting a job. And I'm not saying that Billy was in this position, but life is they take a very different view. Going to work is not really in the mix. Doing this is not in the mix. A lot of people that have these addictions, they're kind of in their own world. And I guess what I'm getting at is that do you think, is there a possibility that Billy has this gift? And I've got some other questions that I want to ask you too. But Billy is in this situation because he didn't have to worry about the day-to-day stuff. Maybe some of the things that maybe this was his path all along from day one when he appeared on this earth. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. First of all, I will say that Billy was probably born addicted because my mom had a lot of trouble with the pregnancy, and way back in those days, they used to give you drugs. Yeah. And she had to stay in bed for something like 6 months, and they used to give her drugs. Mm-hmm. So today, it was probably some kind of morphine. So today they would know that the baby was born addicted. So he already had this tendency. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that he did when I talk about the evidence was he sent me on a treasure hunt. And one of the things that I found at the end of that search that he insisted that I go on were journals that he wrote at the end of his life. And it kind of blew me away because one of the things that he said over and over is, I really want to write a book to help humanity. I really want to take all the wisdom that I've gained and write a book. And now he's doing it after he died, which is really wild. Yeah. And I think that, what he says in the book is like he stood in so many places in his lifetime. He was an addict, but he was also a court liaison who helped people. Instead of going to jail, they went to drug communities. He was a massage person. He was a taxi driver. He had money. He had no money. He lived so many things. And yes, he always lived life by his own rules. He went against the tide. he was very unconventional. And he said, that in a way, even though he was into drugs, he learned a lot by living by his own rules and not being conventional. And one of the things that he encourages people to do is see life through your own eyes. Don't depend on society and the authorities. Make up your own mind about what you're doing here and live life the way you want to.
Be happy and take chances, because you don't have, it's
exactly.
That's awesome, though.
It is awesome.
Yeah.
Another question for you is: does the experiences or the communication or interaction that you have with Billy, does it cause any conflict in your day-to-day life?
At this point, it doesn't, but it caused tremendous difficulty for me at the beginning, which is what I tell people when they're envious and they say, oh, God, I wish, this would happen to me. And I want to say, quite honestly, from my heart, no, you don't. Because your life has to be set up in a way, because it's almost like having a near-death experience over and over again. So, you go, when he comes, you visit this other realm, you have this great energy, and then you're back in the world, with the density, with the difficulty, with the cruelty that's around you, because there's a lot of pain and suffering on the earth. And now I don't have that reaction, but back then it made it almost harder. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you're seeing so much beauty and ease, like I did a post on Facebook today, like, the laws on the other side are very lenient and in your favor, where here it's difficult, and at first life became actually more difficult for me. But now I've learned to really balance it.
Yes, I'd love to read your book. It sounds like an amazing book.
Oh, thank you.
Very, 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 very interesting, without a doubt. Another question for you is, one of our listeners writes in and says, during your encounters with the orb, did you notice any specific colors that indicated a mood, if you will, or a tone? And obviously, did the orb communicate with you?
Yes. The orb was, I would say it was kind of like the color of the sky, but it was transparent. So it was definitely a bluish color. And then one night, he brought a visitor with him who was the brother of my good friend. And that color was slightly different. It was like a golden blue. So I have a feeling, it was his projected entity. Now, I want to say what I believe is that it's not that orb was not really him. Or when I saw him in the sky, that wasn't really him. It was a projection, because the soul, which is what we are after we die, doesn't really come here. It projects light like a projector would. Sometimes people will say, well, they saw a butterfly or a bird and they knew it was like their dead relative, their father or their mother. Well, what I believe about that is it's kind of a messenger. It's not like your mother or father is actually that bird or that butterfly. But when you're on the other side, you're kind of able to use nature, use songs, use electricity to communicate and give a sign that I'm still here, I still love you.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Fringe Radio Show. Our guest tonight is Annie Kagan. Annie, thank you so much for staying up late tonight and being here with us.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
This is an amazing story.
It is.
I've got a couple more questions for you, and then I've got a big question.
Sure.
Another question that one of our listeners sent in is, it says, has he ever mentioned to you about being in contact with other spirits, including past family members and friends?
Yes. One of the things that's different about the book, or Billy's journey, let me be specific, is he didn't meet family members or friends right away. He went into this divine universe, and he was with divine beings, and he met his, what you would say kind of like his guide over there. But that's because Billy, at the time that he died, I have learned from his journals and from what he has said, was really, really into the divine. It's like all that mattered to him, even though he was deep into his addiction, was God, what he would call God. Mm-hmm. And so he went right there, and then later on he met family members in a, let's say, in a more evolved state. But usually when they go to what's called what he calls the super world, which is like the very first level of the afterlife, where most people go. They right away meet their family, they meet their pets, they get used to, not having a body, they're taken care of. But he skipped that level right away, and he goes through a series of meeting really divine beings, and it's very, very beautiful.
Very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here's the big question, and you might have touched on this a little bit, but has he met God?
He has never said that he met, quote, God.
Okay.
But he did meet everything. Everything on the other side is divine, mm-hmm. right? Everything. So at first he says, that the rays of light, because he's floating through the universe, he says, the rays of light there have a personality, like compassion and love and beauty, and he's not sure if they're like the thoughts of God or if they are God. And then he meets divine beings, and as he goes, they become more and more divine. So, and at the end, there are a group of divine beings. So it's almost like everything over there is God, mm-hmm. right? It's not just God,
yeah.
Right.
But the light, the radiance, the energy is all divine. So it's like, being inside of God, all of it. I think that's
the best way to describe it.
Yeah.
Well, now I can see why you think that you get a little jealous of him. You're like, that sounds pretty good to me too.
But I think that what your book, and maybe again this is your journey in life too, is
mm-hmm.
that as we grow older, I think when we're all younger, we all feel pretty invincible. We feel we have a long life ahead, and I think a lot of us are somewhat afraid of dying.
Mm-hmm.
We're afraid of that nothingness. But now, I mean, just as with your experiences and your book and where you are in your life, and you sharing this with so many people, it gives. I don't know if I want to say hope is the right word.
Like a sense of peace, maybe.
But a sense of peace, a sense mm-hmm. of what if, a sense of, not that we want to leave the planet, mm-hmm. not that we want to leave where we're at right now. Hopefully we don't. But it gives us a sense of, the journey has just begun, and there is so much more to this.
Yes, that's really very accurate, and I can't tell you how many messages I get, because reading the book for many people, it's not just like reading a book. It's like you go on the journey that Billy took me on. Mm-hmm. It's like people feel like they go along with him into the realms. And I would say that if you take a really skeptical viewpoint, and a lot of the proofs in the book have to do with information he gives me, and then he has me Google it mm-hmm. and see if what he said about it is true, or like one point he's describing the music where he is, and then he says, oh, it's very similar to, and then he gives me a piece of music by Sibelius, who I've never listened to in my life, and it completely matches. So if you're willing to give me credit that I didn't make the whole thing up, and truthfully, if you read it, I don't know how anyone could make this story up. There's too many proofs. He actually helped save somebody's life, and I could prove that. So if you read the book and you really read it with a very skeptical state of mind, and you look at the proof scientifically, right, and you say, wow, how could this have happened? These things are just too awesome. These are not coincidences anymore. There's something here. And what really is the message of the book? The message of the book is we are really eternal beings. We just go through death. It's really just a doorway. Right. And then if you ask yourself, then when your mind opens to the fact that maybe there really are other realms, and is there a soul, and is there a world beyond this one? And if you just sit with those questions and you say, like, what does that mean for my life today? Like, what if it's not some fairy tale that everybody's made up just to make you feel better? And if how would your life change if you lose some of your fear of dying? And it changes everything.
It does. Does he ever send you messages, Annie? Does he ever come through with stuff and you kind of go, what the hell is this? And it makes absolutely no sense, but then in a very short period of time it all comes together. I mean, do you ever get some of the, I don't want to call it off the wall, but maybe if we want to call it the way out there, and just something that's so out there, and it's like, what are you telling me?
Absolutely. That's what all of the evidentiary after-death communications were. They were strange things, like giving me a name to tell somebody, and I'm like, what? What is that? And it, turns out to be the mother's maiden name, or like a quirky little message about show me the money, or just really strange things that I have no idea what they mean. And the riddle is solved when I go and I give the message to somebody that he told me to give it to. Absolutely, 100%. And they're very comical, and they make me laugh, and all the time. I have no idea what he's saying or what he's talking about.
Well, that's what I guess that's. In a very simple way, that's what obviously must keep it so interesting and intriguing to you.
It does, because, he's very smart. And one of the things he says is that, our viewpoint of things is one of the most important things in life, like how you see any situation. And so when I thought of, I'm the crazy lady who wrote a book with her dead brother, that doesn't really ring my bell. But I love mysteries. Mm-hmm. I read mysteries. I watch mysteries. So when he told me, well, why don't you just be a cosmic detective? Like, you're looking for clues and searching the biggest mystery of all, which is what happens after we die. Then, it all opened up for me, because that's really fun. Exactly. And mysterious and wonderful and interesting. So yeah, it's really interesting, and everybody could make their own detective story, their own mystery, just to open their mind. Like, you said before about your dog. Well, I think a lot of times people hear things or get messages, and they think they're crazy, and so they stop. But what if you kept going with that and see where it led you? Not that you should accept and believe, but examine.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Another question for you is, Annie, do you feel that if she was not as close as she was to your brother, could she still communicate with him? Do you think the closeness is what interlocked you two together?
I think it was closeness, but I think it was destiny, because I think there are people who are probably closer than I was to Billy who don't get communication. I think there are people who had more love even, because we had a lot of conflict also. I just think it was what we were meant to do. And, I was very close with my father. I don't hear from him. Mm-hmm. There was I had a very loving relationship with my dad. And so I don't think that is the criteria. I really don't. I think the fact that I meditated for, so many years for 3 hours a day helped. I think the fact that I was a musician helped because, music is kind of invisible energy. So I don't think love or closeness is the measure.
Yeah. Wow. Touching story. I mean,
yes.
Well, not story, experience.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if our listeners, of course, the book, the details, we're going to make it a point to read it. Where can listeners go ahead? Where can they get the book from you, Annie?
It's on Amazon. Okay, it's called The Afterlife of Billy Fingers. It's on Amazon Kindle, iTunes, Barnes & Noble. It's in some bookstores, but any bookstore can order it. Your library can order it. Hampton Roads is the publisher. And please go to Facebook, not Annie Kagan, but go to Afterlife of Billy Fingers, because there's a community of almost 80,000 people now in a year. And I post sayings from the book with pictures, and there are lots of comments and stories. It's really a beautiful place, and people tune in there every day to get their little uplift from Billy. So, yeah, definitely go to Facebook and the website.
And we've got that linked on our Facebook, and we'll put it on our website as well. Do you think that there's going to be a day, Annie, when this communication will stop?
I don't know. It's not the way it used to be. I don't sit and take dictation from him. So I don't know. I don't know. I don't think so. I think I'll always feel his presence. There may be more things to come. But whether I communicate with him or not, I always kind of have a sense of the other side now. It doesn't just have to be him. Like I feel my mother, I don't have conversations with her, but I'm very aware of the fact that other dimensions exist and that there's light in other dimensions. And I guess what I want to say to people, we long for our relatives, but really there are other things too. There's light, there's love available to you, just from the source itself. Sometimes people, I think this is really interesting. They'll say, because there's people always want to hear about that they're with their relatives, and why didn't Billy meet his relatives right away? Most people do actually, but he didn't. I said this before, but what they're not understanding is, he's with the beautiful, divine, unbelievable, blissful, glorious, divine energy, which is so much better than any love you ever experienced on earth. Right. So, that kind of energy is something we can all try to connect with rather than just a single being. Yes.
But
does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
But I think also that our earth experience, our human experience, probably taught us the definition of what that is. Do you agree with that? I mean, it's what we experienced here as humans, or what we are experiencing here as humans, that's probably it's probably paving the way for us. It's probably laying it down for us. What do you think about that?
It is, and I think that when we first die, we want what's familiar, or we want our loved ones there. But you take all that love with you as you go forward. It's not like you ever lose anything. It's not a place of loss. It's a place of, I guess I would say, you know, that death is a process of getting closer and closer to the light, to the source of everything. It's a journey there.
Exactly.
And, you know, it's beautiful.
Annie, we've got to wrap up for the night. It was, I will let you get some sleep. It's awfully late where you're at on the East Coast, but we want to thank you again for being here. The book is called The Afterlife of Billy Fingers. It was such an honor to have you here.
Yes,
and
it was.
Thank you for giving us the time and sharing your experiences.
Yes.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And tell Billy thank you.
And tell Billy thank you.
I will. I'm sure he knows already. He knows everything.
All right, Annie, have a good night. Have a good morning. Thank you again so much.
too.
You take care.
Take care now.
Good night.
All right, good night.
Bye-bye.